The rain came suddenly that evening, the kind that smelled like wet earth and carried a strange sort of nostalgia. Clara Matthews tightened her coat around her and hurried toward the bookstore cafe she always ran to when the world felt too loud. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and old pages, and the window pane blurred with tiny rivers of raindrops. Clara had always loved rainy evenings. They reminded her of her childhood, of sitting beside her mother in silence while they read under thick quilts. Now they gave her a reason to step away from her screens and into somewhere warm and quiet. Her favorite place was the lantern and Quilla little bookstore cafe tucked into the edge of Alder Creek's cobblestone square. The baristas knew her order, the window seat was unofficially hers, and she always brought her sketch pad. She wasn't expecting anyone to notice her. She never did, but as she shook off the rain and took her usual seat by the window, a deep voice nearby said, "You look like you just walked out of a watercolor painting." Clara blinked, startled. Across from her, a man in a navy wool coat and scruffy stubble handed her a napkin, his smile crooked and warm. He had strong cheekbones, windswept hair, and a kind of casual elegance. "That's not a line," he added with a grin. "I'm just terrible at first impressions." She laughed softly. "And yet you made one." They shook hands. "Ethan Carter," he said. "Architect. Recently escaped from a city full of traffic and too many coffee chains." Clara Matthews, illustrator. Proud owner of 3 sketch pads and a love-hate relationship with deadlines. Their lattes were mixed up, and when they sorted them out, they ended up talking about how they liked their coffee. He liked it bitter and bold. She liked her sweet and spiced. The conversation didn't end. It spilled into childhood memories, favorite books, and unexpected laughter. He asked her about the drawings in her notebook. She asked what kind of buildings he designed. As the hours passed, Clara realized she hadn't laughed like this in a long time. Ethan, too, was aware that something was happening. Something small but important. "Do you come here often?" He asked. She smiled. "Every time it rains?" "Well, then I hope the weather stays terrible." When the bookstore began dimming its lights, signaling closing time, they stood reluctantly. Clara slipped her sketch pad back into her tote. "This was unexpected," she said. "Good unexpected," he replied. She hesitated. He noticed. "Would you like my umbrella?" He offered. She took it. "Only if you don't mind never seeing it again." "I have a feeling I will." As Clara stepped into the rainy night, umbrella in hand, she turned back once to find him watching her through the window, his smile soft, eyes lingering, and though she didn't know his story or even his middle name, she felt it. The start of something. Two. Character development and world building, 3,000 words. Clara lived in a sunlit apartment above her aunt's flower shop. Petal and fern. The scent of roses and lavender often drifted into her windows, blending with the soft hum of morning birds. Her home was cozy, filled with books stacked 2 deep on every shelf, half-finished illustrations pinned to the walls, and mugs filled with colored pencils scattered across her wooden desk. The place reflected her quiet creativity and the care she poured into everything she did. She illustrated children's books for a living tales of magical forests, brave little animals, and friendships that could weather any storm. Her art was gentle, whimsical, full of emotion. And yet, beneath her dreamy illustrations was a heart still healing. 3 years ago, Clara had been engaged to a fellow artist, Daniel, whose departure left more than just an empty closet. He left on the eve of their wedding with no clear reason, only a note that Clara could never bring herself to read again. Since then, she'd built a world that felt controllable, safe. She walked the same streets, visited the same cafe, drew from the same bench at the park. Her Aunt June offered gentle companionship, and her best friend, Mia, a vibrant, witty school teacher with a love for musicals, was the only one who could occasionally convince her to step out of her comfort zone. Meanwhile, Ethan Carter was rediscovering Alder Creek. The town had been his childhood haven, the place where he built forts, rode bikes down hilly streets, and helped his grandmother tend the garden. But when his mother moved them to the city after a bitter divorce, Alder Creek became a memory he tucked away. He hadn't planned to return until his grandmother passed, leaving him her house, her garden, and 100 memories he'd buried beneath years of concrete, deadlines, and architecture awards. Ethan had made a name for himself in the world of design, crafting sleek, modern spaces that grace magazines and hotel chains alike. But success came with a cost: loneliness. He realized, sitting in high-rise offices with glass walls and stainless steel fixtures, that none of it felt like home. His grandmother's house, dusty and overgrown, was more comforting than any penthouse he'd ever stayed in. His plan was simple: sort the estate, sell the house, and return to city life. But that was before the lantern and quill, before the mural project, before Clara. Alder Creek itself was a character in their story. It was the kind of place where the postman knew your dog's name, where neighbors left fresh-baked pies on doorsteps, and Friday evenings were spent at the community center playing bingo or listening to local musicians. It moved at a different pace, one that allowed for reflection, connection, and healing. Ethan started helping with renovations at the community center in honor of his grandmother. He volunteered his design expertise to update the outdated structure, drawing plans late into the night in the room he once slept in as a boy. The locals welcomed him with cautious curiosity. Many remembered him as the boy who used to draw tree houses in math class. Clara and Ethan's paths continued to cross in unexpected ways. She saw him at the farmer's market one morning carrying 2 bags of apples and looking completely out of place among the jam stands and quilt booths. He spotted her sketching the town's bell tower in her notebook. They shared brief smiles and awkward waves until Mia invited Ethan to the community dinner that evening under strings of fairy lights and over mismatched folding tables. Ethan spotted Clara serving peach cobbler. She wore a pale blue sundress, and her hair was braided loosely down one shoulder. When their eyes met, something shifted again. "You clean up nice," she teased. He chuckled. "I was about to say the same thing, though. I doubt I ever looked messy to begin with." She rolled her eyes, but the warmth lingered in her smile. They spent the evening talking under a canopy of trees, tuning out the world. He told her about the first blueprint he ever drew. She told him about the story she was illustrating, a tale of a fox who feared the dark. Somewhere between dessert and goodbye, Ethan realized he hadn't thought about returning to the city. All week, that night, Clara dreamed of him. Not vividly, but just enough to wake with her heart fluttering. And Ethan, sitting on his grandmother's old porch swing, stared into the quiet night and whispered aloud, "What if I stayed?" 3. Growing attraction and romantic tension, 3,000 words. They began to run into each other more frequently at the farmer's market, the bookstore, and even at a painting class Clara accidentally signed up for, where Ethan had been dragged by his cousin. Their growing familiarity sparked something deeper. Ethan offered to help Clara with a mural project at the bookstore, a children's reading nook the owner wanted redesigned. Their collaboration became the perfect excuse to spend more time together. The first day they painted, Clara brought muffins and a thermos of chai. Ethan brought an old radio and a playlist full of jazz and 90s soft rock. They wore old shirts speckled with paint and argued about whether the sky should be indigo or lavender. He liked structure, lines, and balance. She preferred spontaneity and imagination. Their differences made their creation better, full of contrast and charm. One afternoon, Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching a fox under a tree. Ethan leaned over, observing. You draw like you're remembering something, he said softly. She paused, eyes flicking up. Maybe I am. He sat beside her. What memory is this one tied to? She smiled. When I was 5, I got lost in the woods. Behind my house, I was terrified. Then I saw a fox bright red against all the green. It didn't run, just stared at me. I followed it. It led me right back to the garden gate. Ethan's voice was quiet. That's the most magical thing I've ever heard. They talked until the sun dipped behind the rooftops, and neither noticed how close they'd leaned until Clara's shoulder brushed his. She didn't move. Neither did he. Over the next few weeks, their rhythm deepened. Ethan helped her carry groceries home, and Clara lent him her favorite pen when he forgot his own. They shared inside jokes, tiny rituals like splitting a croissant before mural sessions, or leaving doodles in each other's sketchbooks. One Saturday morning, they attended the annual Alder Creek Scarecrow Festival. Clara wore a sunflower dress and carried her sketch pad to draw the displays. Ethan wore a gray sweater that brought out the flecks of green in his eyes. They laughed over hot cider and voted for their favorite scarecrow, which was oddly dressed as a pirate chef. Later, Clara tripped on a tree root while sketching, and Ethan caught her instinctively. Their faces were inches apart. The world paused. Should fall more often, she whispered with a grin. His thumb brushed her hand before he let go. Careful, Clara. I might start hoping you do. That night, Ethan stayed awake, replaying the way she said his name. Clara pressed her pencil against a blank page for hours, unable to draw anything but the curve of his smile. On the eve of the bookstore's reopening, they worked late into the night finishing the mural. A storm had rolled in, echoing their first meeting. Thunder rumbled low as Ethan painted clouds around Clara's golden fox. She stepped back, wiped her hands on her jeans. I think it's perfect. He looked at her, not the mural. Yeah, I think so too. They stood close, their shoulders brushing. A silence settled, warm and heavy. I used to think I was done with surprises, Clara said. But then you walked into that cafe. He tilted his head. Am I a surprise? The best kind. The air between them grew charged. He leaned in slightly, close enough to smell the cinnamon on her skin. She looked up, lips parted, but hesitated. The moment passed. Ethan stepped back. Brains letting up, he murmured. I'll walk you home. She nodded, heart pounding. They didn't kiss, not yet. But the tension between them was thick and unspoken, like a song waiting for its final chord. One rainy afternoon a few days later, Clara brought her sketch pad to the park and found Ethan already there reading under the gazebo. They shared an umbrella, then a story, then hours. He told her about his first heartbreak. She confessed that she still couldn't bring herself to read the goodbye letter Daniel left. That letter doesn't define you. Ethan said gently, You do. And for the first time in a long while, Clara believed it. By now, the whole town had noticed. Aunt June whispered to Mia that Clara was smiling more. Mia teased Clara mercilessly, then hugged her and said, It's about time. At the community center's fall dance, Clara and Ethan danced under fairy lights. The song was slow. Her head fit perfectly against his shoulder. His hand rested on the small of her back, fingers brushing her waist in a way that made her heart ache in the sweetest way. They didn't kiss that night, either, but they didn't need to. Everything about them said love was blooming. It was a slow burn, a growing warmth. The kind of love that snuck up quietly and settled into the bones, like the way rain seeps into thirsty soil. And as the mural dried in the bookstore, and the sky turned gold over Alder Creek, Clara and Ethan stood on the edge of something they both wanted. They just had to be brave enough to reach for it. Their bond grew like spring vines, slow, entwined, inevitable. After the mural project, They didn't need excuses to spend time together anymore. They sought each other out naturally, like breath finds air, like waves find shore. One golden morning, Ethan showed up outside Clara's apartment with a brown paper bag filled with fresh scones and 2 steaming cups of her favorite chai. "Thought you might want to sketch somewhere different today," he said, holding up a car key. He took her to Willow Lake, a secluded spot surrounded by pine trees and wildflowers. Clara had never been there, though it was only 30 minutes. Outside town, they sat on a plaid blanket, overlooking the water. She sketched while he read, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was comforting. "You really love quiet, don't you?" Ethan asked gently. Clara looked up from her drawing. "Quiet is where I remember who I am," he nodded slowly. "It's where I hear what I've been ignoring." They stayed until sunset painted the lake in ribbons of rose and gold. Clara's sketch was unfinished, but her heart felt full. Another time, Ethan invited her to help him restore the overgrown garden behind his grandmother's house. They wore gloves, dug through stubborn roots, and unearthed old ceramic markers with faded names: lavender, mint, camellia. Clara loved watching Ethan's hands in the soil. Strong, focused, gentle. "You really want to bring this back to life?" she asked. "I do," he replied. "Feels like something worth keeping." Their fingers brushed over a trowel. Neither moved. The moment passed, but it stayed with them. Later that week, they spent a rainy afternoon inside his grandmother's house. Clara brought over a jigsaw puzzle, and Ethan baked banana bread that somehow turned out better than either expected. They didn't speak much until they did. "Daniel left me a letter," she confessed, curling her fingers around her mug. "I've kept it in the back of my sketch drawer for 3 years. I never opened it." Ethan set his mug down. "Why? Because if I read it, then maybe I'll have to admit it really happened, that he really didn't love me enough to stay." A pause. Then Ethan's voice, low and steady. "Then don't read it for him. Read it for you, so it doesn't hold power anymore." She looked at him, searching. "Have you ever been afraid to let go of something?" He nodded. "My whole career was built on proving I was enough. For clients, for critics, for a father who never called. I don't know who I am without that fight." Clara reached across the table, resting her hand over his. "Maybe we figure that out together." They didn't kiss, but in the warmth of that small room, with the scent of cinnamon and rain, they shared something deeper. Truth. On Clara's birthday, Ethan planned a surprise. He took her to the town's art museum, small but charming, where he had arranged a private viewing of their newest children's illustration exhibit. She was stunned. "You did this for me?" she asked, eyes misty. "I wanted you to see how the world looks at the magic you create." Later, under a vine-covered archway, he handed her a wrapped package. Inside was a handcrafted leather sketchbook. On the first page, he'd drawn her fox under a starry sky. "I'm not an artist," he said shyly, "but I wanted to try." Clara touched the page like it was fragile porcelain. "It's perfect." They were falling in love, not like fire, but like sunrise, steady, certain. Clara introduced Ethan to her Aunt June, who took one look at him and said, "So you're the man who's got her humming again." Ethan brought Clara to the annual garden party his grandmother once hosted. It had been discontinued for years, but he revived it. With lanterns in the trees and jazz on the record player, the evening felt enchanted. Clara wore a soft yellow dress, and Ethan couldn't stop watching her laugh with children as she painted butterflies on their cheeks. That night, he walked her home. At her door, they lingered. "Clara," he began, then hesitated. "There's something I've been meaning to say." Her breath caught. "Yes." He shook his head. "Not yet. Not like this. Not at your doorstep." She smiled. "Then when you're ready." Still, she stepped close, rested her forehead against his. He closed his eyes, her hands in his. No kiss, but an intimacy deeper than lips could carry. That night, she finally opened the letter Daniel left. Inside, it was shorter than she expected. An apology, a confession of fear. A line she would remember forever. Asterisk. You deserve someone who wouldn't. Run, asterisk, she wept, quietly, but not because it still hurt. Because she finally let it go. The next morning, she left the letter on the riverbank and watched it drift away. When Ethan showed up with a bag of tulip bulbs and asked, "Want to plant something permanent today?" She said yes. Love, she realized, wasn't about fireworks or fanfare. It was about this quiet truth, unwavering support, and the courage to show someone your scars. And as they kneeled in the garden, side by side, hands in the earth, Clara knew. She was already his dot and he hers. The call came on a crisp October morning, when Clara and Ethan were harvesting the last of the autumn pumpkins from the community garden. Ethan's phone buzzed once, then again. He silenced it the first time, laughing at something Clara said about how the pumpkins looked like stubborn old men. But the third time, he stepped away. He returned 10 minutes later, quieter. Clara noticed. "Everything okay?" He nodded. "Just ... work." She didn't press, but something in her chest tightened. Later that evening, he told her everything. An international firm in Paris had seen his work in a design magazine, including the plans he'd drawn for the Alder Creek Community Center. They were offering him a once-in-a-lifetime project, designing a children's hospital with a creative wing that combined play, architecture, and healing spaces. The kind of opportunity his younger self would have leapt at without a second thought. But everything's different now, he admitted. "You're here." She smiled sadly, and Paris isn't. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken tension. Ethan withdrew, unsure whether to accept the offer or stay. Clara tried to be supportive, but inside she was unraveling. He hadn't asked her what she thought. He was deciding alone. A week passed. Then Mia showed up at Claire's door with 2 mugs of cocoa and a firm look. "What's going on?" Mia asked. "He's leaving," Clara said flatly. "Did he say that?" "He didn't have to." Clara stopped going to the mural. She avoided the bookstore and buried herself in her work. Ethan, meanwhile, couldn't bring himself to finish packing. He wandered the house, touched the sketchbook Clara gave him, stared at the garden they had planted together. His heart was torn. The night before his planned flight, Clara received an envelope on her doorstep. Inside was a small hand-drawn map, tracing all the places they'd been together: Willow Lake, the bookstore, the gazebo, the garden. At the bottom, a note: asterisk, everywhere I found you. I found myself asterisk still. She didn't go to him, not yet. That same evening, Aunt June cornered Clara gently. "Love is always a risk, honey, but the real loss is not taking the chance." "He hasn't left yet." "What does that tell you?" Clara whispered. "It tells me he's scared." June nodded. "Then maybe he needs to know you are too." In the middle of the night, Clara returned to the mural. She stood under the unfinished sky and let herself cry. For what might have been. For what still could be. Ethan was already there. He was sitting on the floor, sketchbook in his lap, staring up at the wall. He looked at her. "I can't do it. Paris?" She asked. "No, leaving you." She crossed the space slowly. "You don't have to choose between a dream and a person, Ethan, but you do have to let someone in." "I'm terrified," he admitted, "of choosing wrong, of staying and resenting you, or going and losing you." Clara nodded. "Then choose. You us, and we figure the rest out." He reached for her hand. She held on tightly. That night, under the half-finished mural and the hum of stormy wind, they didn't solve everything, that they chose each other, and that was the first step, the night. Before Ethan's flight was thick with silence. The rain, gentle at first, began to fall with intention tapping windows. echoing through gutters, soaking Alder Creek, in a storm that mirrored the tension between two hearts teetering on the edge of goodbye. Clara sat alone on her apartment floor, surrounded by half-finished sketches and the unopened suitcase that should have been filled with hope. Her hands trembled around a mug of cold tea. She had spent the day pretending she was fine, that he might leave, fine that her heart was already cracked in places she hadn't known could still hurt, but she wasn't fine. And she hadn't been since he handed her that map, the one that showed every place they'd found each other. She closed her eyes and whispered into the silence, "Please don't go." Across town, Ethan stood in the middle of the bookstore, the mural before him like a page that refused to turn. The painted fox waited under the tree, but the sky above it, left intentionally unfinished, felt symbolic now. A decision unmade, a life unfinished. He reached out, his fingers brushing the wall like he was reaching for Clara herself. The scent of paint and paper wrapped around him, and her voice echoed in his head. "You don't have to choose between a dream and a person." "Ethan." He stepped back, overwhelmed. The architect in him wanted plans, logic, blueprints, but love didn't follow structure. Love required something else. Faith. He left the mural and walked into the storm. Clara didn't hear him approach, but she felt him like gravity shifting. She looked up from the gazebo bench where she sat sketching in the dim glow of lamplight. Her sketch pad was soaked at the corners, the lines smudged into blurs. Ethan stood in the rain, hair dripping, shirt plastered to his frame, eyes wide and pleading. "You should be on a plane," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Couldn't," he said, "not without finishing this." He stepped closer, his shoes splashing through puddles. "Not without finishing us." Clara stood, her breath caught between hope and heartache. "Ethan. I'm scared." "I know," he said, voice trembling. "Me too." He took her hands in his, cold and shaking. "But I've built towers and theaters and city halls, and none of them matter. None of them felt like home until I walked into the lantern and quill and saw you sketching in the window." She swallowed. "Hard. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I thought I had to choose. But I don't. I can take the project and build a life with you. I can fly back and forth. I can postpone. I can find a way. But I can't lose you. I won't." Clara stared at him, soaked, desperate, heart open. "You're serious?" She whispered. "I love you," he said simply. Clara stepped into his arms, the rain falling harder now. "Then stay. Or go, but only if we do it together." And he kissed her. Finally. It was not a kiss of fire and fury, but of rain and roots. Steady, sure grounding. The kind of kiss that didn't need a future promised in words, because it was promised in every moment they had already shared. They returned to the bookstore the next morning, hand in hand. The sky had cleared, but the streets still glistened. Together. They climbed the ladder and painted the last piece of the mural. At the center of it, beneath a sky that bloomed into morning, stood two figures, a girl with her sketch pad, a boy with his coat collar turned up, both under a red umbrella, their hands linked. Their eyes turned toward each other. It was the end of the mural, but not the end of the story, because some beginnings start again, right where the rain first fell. Resolution and happily ever after. 3,000 words. The mural was completed in the soft glow of a spring morning, with Clara and Ethan standing side by side, paint splattered and smiling. Beneath the tree at the center, two figures stood under a red umbrella, hand in hand, eyes turned toward one another. It wasn't just art, it was their story captured in brushstrokes and sky blue paint. A permanent reminder that love had found them unexpectedly, quietly, and entirely. The bookstore hosted a reveal party. The lantern and quill buzzed with life. Children gathered around the mural, pointing at the golden fox and the umbrella. Locals whispered about the two artists who had become part of the town's fabric. Aunt June brought scones, Mia brought flowers, and even the mayor came by to offer a speech about how art had the power to transform hearts. Later, as the crowd thinned, Ethan slipped his hand into Clara's. "I think we did good," he said. Smiled. "We did more than good." Over the next few months, life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan didn't take the Paris offer, but he didn't turn away from his career either. He partnered with a smaller firm in Alder Creek, allowing him to design community spaces and schools across the region. He found fulfillment in smaller projects, ones that impacted people personally. He opened a modest studio above the bakery and filled it with models, blueprints, and photographs of the mural. Clara's career blossomed. Inspired by their journey, she created a children's book titled One Rainy Evening, which chronicled the adventures of a shy fox and a curious bird who find courage and friendship in storms. It received glowing reviews and quickly became a bestseller. She was invited to speak at schools and book festivals, but she always returned home to her apartment above Petal and Fern and to Ethan's waiting arms. They began spending weekends in his grandmother's house, tending the garden they had revived together. The tulips they planted that spring bloomed in bursts of yellow and crimson. They painted the porch swing white, strung fairy lights along the railing, and held hands under starlit skies wrapped in quilts and soft silence. One quiet Sunday morning, Clara awoke to the smell of pancakes and cinnamon. She padded into the kitchen in fuzzy socks and found Ethan flipping pancakes in her apron, humming a tune she recognized from the bookstore's radio. "Morning," he said, leaning in for a kiss. "You know what today is?" Clara blinked. "Sunday? Our 6-month meet-cute anniversary?" She laughed. "You're keeping track?" "Of course. It's the day the rain changed everything." They celebrated with a picnic at Willow Lake. Ethan spread out the blanket while Clara sketched the water. When they finished lunch, he pulled out a small velvet box. Clara froze. Ethan he knelt, holding it up with a nervous smile. "It's not a proposal yet, but it is a promise that wherever we go, whatever rain we face, I'll choose you." Tears gathered in her eyes. She reached for the ring, a simple band, etched with a tiny fox and an umbrella. "It's perfect," she whispered. Their love wasn't about grand gestures or fireworks. It was in the way Ethan refilled her tea without asking, in the way Clara left notes in his sketchbook with tiny doodles and encouragement. In the quiet spaces where two people could exist fully and honestly without fear, Mia eventually became Clara's maid of honor, and Aunt June handled the flowers. They married in the garden behind the bookstore, surrounded by fairy lights and the people who had watched their love bloom. Rain threatened all day, but held off until their vows as they kissed. The sky let go. A gentle drizzle fell, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara beamed. Of course it rained. Ethan leaned in. Perfect timing. They danced in the rain, just the two of them. Barefoot on cobblestones. Years later, they told their story to their children, beginning always with that bookstore, that storm, and that first rainy evening. Because love, real love, often arrives. Not with thunder, but with the soft hush of rain. And sometimes the best chapters begin with a single drop falling on a window pane.